Hello, Music Theory 1. First new video of the spring semester here. So we're diving into chapter 5, which is voice leading, principles of voice leading. So we're going to start learning how to write four-part textures and how to voice lead from one harmony into the next harmony. So we'll be using all of our skills that we acquired in fundamentals, as well as new skills in how to write a melody and how to write four melodies that combine into harmonies, which voice lead to other harmonies. So really, this is how a lot of composers started out with counterpoint, basic melody against melody, and then grew those into more complex textures. And you can read a little bit about that in the beginning of this chapter. The first thing we want to address in this chapter, though, is the melodic line, right? And so the melodic line is probably the most important element and the most fundamental element of music, right? We don't really think of music as being conceived in harmonies, right? But first we think of music being conceived as melodic lines. If we think about the origins of music as heightened speech or as elongated speech, right? Really, we can only have a melodic line. That's all a vocalist can do. So that's where we start, and then from there we can add another melodic line, a separate melodic line that then creates a harmony to that original line, and then we can create a third and a fourth, and from that we get harmonies, and of course we can use our tertian system to create different types of chord progressions and different types of voice leading. So some important elements when considering a melodic line, specifically in dealing with four-part textures, which is really what we're going to be doing. We're going to keep the rhythm very simple. Usually we're going to have quarter notes or some consistent beat throughout our four-part textures. Most typically we'll see quarter notes, but we can see other types of rhythms and meters as well. Harmony, as far as harmony is concerned, really every melody note should belong to the harmony that's below it. So what does that mean? Well, let's take a quick look here at this melodic example, and we're going to look more specifically at this as to what makes a good and bad melody. But let's take this first one, for instance. So we have the chords in C major, 1, 5, 1, and again 1, 4, 5, 1. That's kind of how it starts. So what they mean by each melodic note should belong to the harmony is this. So let's think about our first melody note here, E. Yeah, and we have a 1 chord here. What's in a 1 chord in C major? Well, think about it for a second. C, E, G. What they mean by each of the melody notes should belong to our harmony means that this note should be a chord tone in the harmony that it's being played against, right? So E is the chordal third of our 1 chord, and so it works quite nicely. But think of it this way. Let's say instead of an E we had, an F, and we played that together with our harmony. A little more dissonant, of course, because F is not a chord tone here. So I'll be using this language specifically. When we're writing our melodies, we're looking for chord tones to represent the harmony that we have written below. So each of these notes should be part of or a chord tone of the harmonies that they're being played against. Or with, I should say, not against, with. And you'll find that this is the case. It's a little chunky, but you get the idea. Okay, so notes should go along with our harmonies, right? And you'll see this more in four-part textures as we go through. Let's go quickly back here. Contour. The melody should be primarily conjunct, you see that there, which means stepwise, so not a lot of leaps. And really you can think about any melody that's singable, that's tuneful. A melody that's singable and tuneful doesn't sound like this. Right? Very leapy, of course, and I was super leapy on that part. But we want to avoid excess leaps, right? We want to have something that's very stepwise melodic. Stepwise, of course. I had a couple of little leaps in there, but something that's tuneful is gonna generally be conjunct. The shape of the melody should be interesting, right? Not one up and down like a scale, and have usually a single focal point, meaning one high or low note that stands out of the rest. They say highest note, but it really can be either, depending on the shape of your melody. So let's think about those aspects for these particular examples, and I'm just going to play the root note for each of my chords. So this is a good example of a harmony, right? We're mostly stepwise in our motion. We have one focal point, highest note, and the contour is rather interesting, going down and then back up and then down, little step, skip there and there. So we have a nice little curve to this. Okay, so let's look at the next one now. We do have one focal point, but this is rather boring, right? We just kind of go up and down, so not a very interesting contour. Okay, so let's look at the next one now. Now let me play the chords so you can hear kind of some of the other things going wrong with it. Hopefully you heard that. Oops, my Apple Pencil is running out of battery here. So we have two focal points, and I think that's pretty clear. This right here is a non-chord tone. E does not belong to the 5 chord, which is G, B, D. So this is a non-chord tone. So melody note is not in chord. So that's not good. So we want to have chord tones, generally speaking, until we get to non-chord tones, which is a few chapters ahead. So there you go. This would be the primary way in which you evaluate melodies, and you're going to be doing this for your homework. Okay, so some other things to consider. Don't be leapy. But if you do have leaps, we want to avoid augmented intervals. So augmented seconds, augmented thirds, augmented fourths, especially that tritone. We want to avoid sevenths and any intervals larger than a perfect octave. Diminished intervals may be used if the melody changes direction by step immediately after the interval. Okay, so that's the one exception there. But we do want to avoid diminished intervals too. Any melodic interval larger than a perfect fourth, and this is important, is usually best approached by and left in the opposite direction to the leap. So what does that mean? Well, let's jump over here. And so if we have a melody, now I have this written out here, we're going to do this exercise, but entertain me for a second. If we have a leap, say, of a fourth or larger, we've gone ascending, and so we want to leave that leap stepwise in the opposite direction. Or another example would be, say we have F to D, and we'd want to step down. So we're leaping up and we want to step down in the opposite direction. Or we could even go the other direction. Say we're leaping downward by a sixth here. We want to leap down and then step up in the opposite direction. This process of leaping in one direction and then stepping in the opposite direction smooths out the leap and prevents a leapy texture if we then continue it by step. So anything larger than a fourth is what the textbook is saying. Okay, the last thing I want to point out here is tendency tones. Yes? Oops, sorry, I should have gone back. When a leap is smaller, when smaller leaps are used like thirds, they should probably outline a triad, and that's really anything that's a third or a fourth should be arpeggiating a triad, right? So that's okay as long as we are arpeggiating or leaping in the outline of a triad. Tendency tones. Let's talk about our tendency tones. Our most important tendency tones are, of course, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, and ti is a tendency up to do. That's why you point up with your hand sign. Ti, do. So anytime you have ti in your texture, right, or scale degree 7, usually it has a strong tendency to move up to do, right? Sometimes if we're going down in a scale, in a descending scale, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, that's fine. Notice that we went through ti, and that's okay if we're in that descending motion. But if we're dancing around ti, if we arrive on ti, generally we want to resolve it up. The other tendency tone we want to consider is scale degree 4, or what we would call Fa, so here's our tendency tones here. And this is Fa, right, and that's scale degree 4, which usually moves down. And again, that's where our half step is in our scale. So if we have a nice little melody, do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi. Notice Fa went to mi there. Or we could even go do, mi, sol, mi, fa, mi. Fa is gonna fall downward to mi. So Fa falls to mi, or in the case of minor scales, Fa does like to fall to mi. The tendency is not as strong because it's not a half step. So remember your tendency tones. We'll be talking a lot about tendency tones, especially when we start talking about specifically our voice leading and where those tendency tones land in our different harmonies. Okay, so let's go over and look at some of these ideas of leaps and tendency tones inside of this example here. And here we have a texture in A minor. And it's a nice little melody here. Or without those chords in the bass. Sorry. I'll probably take out one of those one chords. Some things I want you to notice. Scale degree 7, right? Or T. There it is. It's being resolved up, right? That's where we want it to go. And notice we have an accidental here because we're in a minor key. And so we have to raise it. That 7th scale degree has to be raised out of minor mode. All right, what else do we have? Well, let's look over here. Here we have a large leap of a 6th rather. It goes down by step, following that leap rule. Anything larger than a 4th should be followed by a step in the opposite direction. Okay, and then finally we have one more tendency tone here, T, and again, that is resolved up. Now here we do also have a leap, but notice that this is outlining, somewhat outlining our chord here, and we're not moving harmonies. We just have one harmony of 5, so in this case it's okay. But when we do change harmonies back to a 1, we want to see it go in the opposite direction. Okay, so let's look at the next one, which is not such a good example. Oops, excuse me. There we go. Playing that a little too fast. Now this melody does not sound as good. Why? What are some of the reasons? Well, let's look at our tendency tones here. This one definitely resolves up, but look at this tendency tone. It does not resolve up, right? And it's actually not as a part of a descending scale. So this is actually, this is an error. This is something we want to avoid. It leads to choppy, chunky, unresolved, not satisfying melody writing. Okay, so what else is going on? For C here. This would be a lot of leaping around, a lot of consecutive leaps here without arpeggiating a particular chord. In this case, it's not outlining a triad at all, it's outlining fourths, which gives you a very angular sound, right? So this is not a very good melody. And again, here, our leap here doesn't resolve in the opposite direction because of where we landed. We landed on that tendency tone, which means we have to go up. So, and then the other thing I would say here is that this interval is the interval of a diminished fifth, and this is an interval we want to avoid writing or putting in our melody at all costs, right? It's hard to sing, and it doesn't sound very good at all. Okay, so it didn't resolve tendency tones, weird leaps, not resolving the opposite direction, just not a very good melody. And not very satisfying, not as compared to our first one. Has a nice focal point at the top, has a great contour, follows all of our chords, so there you go. Okay, so those are some details about melody writing, and you can listen to a couple of these. I'll just play them for you. These are some nice melodies. Excuse me, we're in the key of B flat major. And this is, I'll just play the melody lines here. Nice little melody there, kind of spinning out there. Let me listen to a little Bach French suite here.
Example 5.
Actually, I'm going to let you listen to that on your own because I'm going to get an echoing sound if I do. I would like you to go ahead and criticize these melodies on your own. The answers are in the back of the book, so go ahead and do that. And then let's look at these. I have copied these down in my Fourscore, so let's go ahead and practice writing out some melodies together. Now, the first thing you might want to do is go ahead and write out E, G, B, all of the chord tones in your melodies here, and it will help you, E, G, B, and I'm going to be running out of Apple Pencil here soon. Remember, 5 chord in E minor. You're going to want to say B, D, F sharp, but remember that D needs to be sharped as your leading tone, and it'll be the same here. And then this will be E, G, B, and it'll be the same for your 1 chord. Now, why am I writing these out? Well, the notes in our chords are going to be possibilities for our melody, right? So we got to use chord tones when we're writing out our melody. And so all of the notes in our chord represent possible melody notes. Let's just go ahead and start. We're gonna kind of take a risk here and say, let's start with G, okay? And where would be the best possible place to go? We can go up to A, we can leap down to E, we can leap up to B. I'm gonna say, we're starting with G here. Let's go to A next and just kind of see where that takes us. We'll go up to B. And you know what? I kind of want to leap down. So let's go down to G and see what happens. Make a little leap there. So far we have this. Okay. I'm going to go down to F sharp here, which is in our key, right? And I'm going to make a leap here. I'm going to make a leap to B. And I'm going to stay on B here for my next melody note, because I have E, G, B. And I'm going to stay on B one more time. That might be too many Bs. We might have to go back and change things a little bit. But I want to go up to the C here. And then I'm going to go down, back down to my B, and finally down to G at the very end here. Let's see how this sounds. I don't really like the end very much. I'm not a big fan of the end. We could possibly do this, but it will actually create an augmented second here if we go up to that D sharp instead. And notice, I do have that as a possibility, but again, we want to avoid augmented intervals in our melody writing. I didn't particularly like how this played itself out. So I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to jump up here, and I'm going to change this. I'm going to keep, let's see, I have a 1 chord here. So I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to write a B here. I'm going to put another B here. And then I want to make an ascent up to a D sharp here, arpeggiating that 5 chord. And then remember, this is a tendency tone, and that has to go up. And I'm going to keep that. And then I'm going to, let's jump down to C here, and then we'll go to B. And we'll go ahead and keep our B at the end too. I'm going to make that the same direction for our stems. Let's see how this sounds. Again, I have some awkward leaps here. Mostly this is the same direction, and I don't particularly like that very much. So I think I might do a nice big leap here in this note to give me a change in direction. And namely, I'm going to do this. Make a nice big leap. So I got a leap of a sixth there. And remember, that leap, I need to go in the opposite direction here. So let's see how this sounds. Good, so I like the ends. I like that, but I don't like what precedes it. So, what do I want to do here? Let's see, I think I'm going to make another little jump right here because I think that will help me. We'll go all the way up to E. And let's see if I can make something of this. I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the B, or the D sharp here. I have 2 focal points now, but I don't mind that. I think it's okay. So let's see how this sounds. That's not bad. Again, I can keep fiddling with it. Maybe I can even start in a different direction for the beginning of my melody. But again, I can go through and fiddle a little bit more. You're a little bit of a slave to the harmonies, but this might be the process. And you might want to go through and change something else. You can even start how you change at the beginning. You can have other leaps at the beginning. I could even change, and I could go at the beginning, instead of going from a G, I can go from a B, and that would change things. I don't like that. I don't mind that. Even at the end, I kind of like that falling. Right. I like that. That's not bad. So you get the idea, and you'll just have to go through and figure out what your chord tones are, write something you might like, erase it, try something else. Sit down at the piano when you do this. I think that's the most effective way. All right, that's all for melody writing. Good luck.